Okay, great. I see the numbers still increasing a little bit, but we'll get going. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this CFS side event number 14 called How Can Data and Digital Technology Support Smallholder Farmers and Enable More Equitable, Inclusive, and Sustainable Food Systems? It's such a pleasure to have you with us today. My name is Jenna Slotin. I am the Director of Policy of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. I'm very pleased to welcome you on behalf of all the co-organizers today, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the FAO, the US Department of Agriculture, and the Digital Agriculture Association. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers to dig into the question of how data and digital agriculture can support smallholder farmers. But first, a few logistics for today's side event. We regret to say that we will not have any interpretation today. The logistics of setting up interpretation weren't possible for today's side event, I'm afraid. Secondly, we welcome everyone's questions in the chat. Please feel free to rename yourself in the list of participants, indicating your name and your affiliation, and feel free to use the chat box for any questions. I will gather those up and put them to our panelists. So today's event is very timely with the recent conclusion of the UN Food Systems Summit and the data workstream of the CFS just getting going. As you all know, hunger is on the rise and our current food systems are no longer sustainable. An estimated 811 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020, a situation that was greatly exacerbated by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Smallholder farmers are at the heart of local, national, and regional food systems and produce around a third of the world's food on only 12% of all agricultural land. However, smallholder farmers are facing a multitude of obstacles, including low productivity levels due to increasing climate variability, lack of access to inputs, finance, and markets, and suffering hunger themselves. The Food Systems Summit has highlighted that data and digital transformation must underpin global efforts to accelerate progress on global food security and nutrition. But harnessing this potential requires increasing investment by donors and governments domestically, and a more effective approach that strengthens foundational data systems and governance frameworks for that data, and that very importantly supports local knowledge and capacity development. So there are growing calls for a new consensus with smallholder farmers that would be crafted and signed by smallholder farmer organizations, civil society, governments, and international organizations that could contribute to and build on the momentum of the global summits and align policy priorities and drive decision-making and investment where it is needed most. The goal of such a new consensus would be to join the dots across the many good pieces of research, policy recommendations, and action agendas that already exist to align priorities and achieve greater collective impact. So in today's side event, we will explore the opportunities and risks of using data and digital agriculture for food systems transformation. What's needed to ensure effective system-wide collaboration at the global, regional, and country levels, and how the CFS data workstream can support this process. So to help us explore these questions, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who bring broad expertise and a diversity of perspectives. To kick us off with opening remarks, I am very pleased and honored to introduce Undersecretary Roldan Jorjonio from the Department of Agriculture of the Philippines. Please, Undersecretary, the floor is yours for your opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gina Stulin, our Senior Director of Policy, Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and all those who are in attendance in this particular meeting. The Philippines today embarks on a more sustainable food system to its more than 110 million population. As our guidepost, we are committed through our Philippine Development Plan 2017 to 2022 to expand economic opportunities in agriculture, fishery, and forestry. We believe that this sector is pivotal in reducing poverty and inequality for 3/4 of the poor who are in the rural areas. Through the leadership of this present administration of President Rodrigo Duterte and our Department of Agriculture Secretary, William Dar, we believe that our country's food system transformation should be anchored on modernization, industrialization, value chain-based consolidation of farms, and professionalization through a whole of government approach, meaning taking a closer look now of the organizational mindset and culture towards disruptive change. These are our vehicles in our pursuit for a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable food system, since we believe that enabling our farmers and fisherfolk, including those smallholder farmers, is the key to the realization of Philippine Agriculture 4.0. With the farmland supply dwindling from factors like land degradation, extreme weather conditions, rigid urbanization, and what have you, and that putting in place good agricultural practices in the farms, the only solution left is the adoption of new or better technologies. So we believe that providing our smallholder farmers the tools for productivity and cost efficiency and the information for decision making gives them the power to attain high productivity and profit. We are vigorously addressing and pushing this agenda through our own digital agriculture framework consistent with that of our food security and the One Day Reform agenda, specifically under our technology and innovation strategy, which includes digital agriculture. So we therefore put our country now in the world map for digitalization. As this initiative evolves and considering that to humbly emphasize, we are still in the infancy stage. May I walk you through the baby steps of our approach, which we call Smart Agri, is MART-AGRI framework, which outlines 9 specific functions for the benefit of our farmers and fishers. S stands for seamless interconnectivity and Internet of Things. M for mainstreaming of multi-platform technologies in disaster risk reduction and management and climate change adaptation. A stands for agribusiness links and networks. R, real-time access to information, precision farms, farm apps, and agribots. 5, transparent governance and accountability in the delivery of services with the development of Farmers Interventions Monitoring System, or FIMS. A stands for alignment of ICT initiatives in all our operational processes, policies, research for development, competency development, and our corporate social responsibility collaborations. Geodatabasing of agricultural resources and interventions. R stands for risk management of ICT resources and services, which touches on business continuity and disaster recovery, among others. And lastly, I stands for interoperable systems for ease of doing business, where we have what we call Bayani Kita app. This is a local innovation, a mobile app, an online payment system, and the automated government service management system. So the use of these technologies will leverage across the food value chain among research development, access to inputs, production, marketing, wholesale, and distribution, retail product traceability. So this transformation from traditional to digital will help farmers and fishers improve productivity and, more importantly, cut down waste. So the Philippine Department of Agriculture is currently mobilizing all its resources to enhance the implementation of those functions in the framework for a food secure Philippines, as we recognize that the world will need to feed 9 billion people by 2050, thus requiring a 70% production increase in food from current levels, and that is according to FAO. So this pursuit is a sworn pledge, and we believe that data and digital technology are our vectors to get us there. So having said that, innovation culture and digital agriculture technologies shall be considered in all the regulatory or policy framework among nations. The knowledge and resources sharing among international communities pave the way for the empowerment of more farmers and expedite ensuring global food security in the near future. So this is our key takeaway and our practical thought on the matter, that we will be gaining more inspirations as the digital world drives innovation and transformation. This is the new core value that we embrace as a nation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Those were really inspiring words, and what a great example. I hope you're able to stay with us. I think the audience gathered may have some questions for you about the Philippine approach. It sounds like you're taking the importance of data and the role of digital agriculture at the core of your strategy. And so now what we will do is we will move to the panel. We're going to have a panel discussion with several panelists. I'll introduce them all now, and then we'll go one by one. We have Maximo Torrero Cullen here with us, the Chief Economist of the FAO. He's known to many of you. We have Elsa Simoes, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Mission of Cabo Verde to the Rome-based agency. We have Beatrice Gakuba, Executive Director of the African Women Agribusiness Network. We have Josh Woodard, Senior Digital Advisor at the USA Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. And Vivian Faria, Enterprise Customer and Product Success Manager from Trimble Ag Business Solutions. We also have with us Professor Kevin McDonald, Crop Science and Biosystems Engineering at the University College Dublin, who will sum up and provide closing remarks. So I'm going to be asking 2 questions to each of the panelists, and then we'll have questions from the audience. We'll start with Maximo because he is extremely busy, especially during the CFS plenary, and won't be able to stay with us for the whole event. We'll go over to Maximo. Maximo, if you want to come on video now.
I am on
we'll
video.
go okay, perfect. Apologies, it probably wasn't showing up in my screen. Maximo, so for your first question, what were the main outcomes from the UN Food Systems Summit on data and digital transformation at national, regional, and global levels? Please, over to you for a few minutes.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And the Innovation Lever on Data and Digital Working Group, I think, will leverage its momentum through the Global Coalition for Digital Food Systems Innovation, which brings public, private, and non-profit organizations committed to be responsible for the digital innovation in the food systems, which will be crucial to be able to accelerate the process of the transformation that we're looking for. So the Global Coalition will support an open and inclusive data and digital ecosystem created by 3 delivery platforms. The first one will be the Digital Data Cornucopia, which is a common resource-efficient data infrastructure. This initiative brings together a consortium of organizations to co-develop a common resource-efficient data infrastructure to facilitate data use and sharing for food systems analysis. The second will be the Future of Food Marketplace, which is as a model of efficient, interactive, and climate-smart markets. This initiative develops and supports transparent, inclusive digital pathways and sustainable models enabling farmers and consumers to build more efficient climate-smart markets for nutritious food. So it's specifically targeted to climate-smart agriculture. And the third element is the One Map, which brings and generates public good data sets. And this initiative develops data agency and consent management mechanisms linking small agri-food system businesses, policymakers, and digital service providers to generate foundational data and analytical assets for digital food systems innovation and interoperability from individual global scale. So 3 elements: digital data cornucopia, the future of food marketplace, and One Map. The coalition memberships will expand to deepen and diversify its ecosystem footprint and to harness synergies with aligned platforms and initiatives, and that will be the role of this process and the work that we're going to do in the process of transition of the summit. And it will ensure that data and digital technologies are used to their fullest potential to drive public good, climate, biodiversity, nutrition, and development outcomes through food system transformation. It will also mobilize collective action in digital innovation in food systems to meet the needs of the regional, national, and local communities in an alignment with the global mechanisms that we have in place. At the Food Systems Summit, 85 heads of state spoke about the food systems, and this is unprecedented, and many underline the importance of data and digital services to spark agri-food system transformation. And the coalition will commit to ethical action, agile governance, and collaborative learning through shared version and 5 guiding principles: build an inclusive digital revolution, foster data agency and responsible sharing, and be force multipliers and iterate and share learnings and innovative responsibility. So this is what came out. The work right now has to focus on the transition process and how we can embrace other important players so that we can work around these 3 platforms, and if needed, increase the number of platforms to be able to accelerate the process. In the case of FAO, data is one of the accelerators across all our strategic framework, and this plays perfectly into that work that we are doing. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Maximo. Great to hear the summary of those coalitions that came out and where they're focusing and what they're prioritizing. So can you tell us a little bit about how the international community can build on this momentum to accelerate progress? And what's the role of FAO? You started to get at that, but is there additional support from the international community you need to see this transition through to making these coalitions happen?
No, thank you for that questions, and let me go a little bit more in detail. So FAO plays a key role in promoting the use and adoption of digital technologies to facilitate the transformation of agri-food systems. As many of you are aware, we did a huge effort to bring together all our geospatial platform in our geospatial platform for the Hand in Hand initiative, which is one of the leading initiatives of FAO, but that helped us to bring an enormous amount of data that we had. Plus, we have FAOstat, where we publish all our data, and we're trying to increase the power of FAOstat as much as possible. So FAO role is to advise and to promote a policy agenda and public investments to address digital divide and massify also digital benefits. So we're working in both elements, not only in the generation of data, big data, the statistical data that we work, and also other mechanisms to try to bring the geospatial data. But also we have to work on how we can improve the access to digital infrastructure, which today is lagging behind, because we need to close this digital gap. And that's where we are working together with the Broadband Commission to try to find solutions to achieve this. And FAO is also contributing to the UN Secretary Roadmap for Digital Cooperation by championing digital public goods. Data is key to de-risk information that helps to investment, and that's the way we have to look at it. It will play a crucial role in the transformation plans by countries. So our activities and the activities we foresee coming from the summit have to have an action at the country level, and that's where data and the best possible data that we have will help enormously to bring and de-risk investments from the private sector and even from the public sector, but will also help to increase resilience for the most vulnerable, and provide access to other data that will help also to minimize the risk for financial services. Data helps enormously, not only financial, like lending, but also helps enormously to reduce the cost of the reinsurance for reinsurance activities, which will play such a crucial role because of the climate change and because of the vulnerability that most poor countries have. Combined to that, FAO have launched the 1,000 Digital Villages initiative, which could be pilots where we can test this type of a mechanism. But we also have the International Platform for Digital Food and Agriculture that is already being approved by our membership and our council and conference, and will be effectively launched. And this will allow us also to bring South-South learning together in everything we do in terms of data and in digital. And we also are part of the Rome Call for Artificial Intelligence and Ethics. And finally, our hand-in-hand geospatial platform, as I mentioned before, is another mechanism that will allow us to bring this information. And FAO co-leads the Data and Digital Coalition of the UN Food System Summit, and that's where we can act and move fast with all the partners to try to achieve the goals that we have in mind as part of FAO, which is at the end of the line, using all this information to achieve better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life, leaving no one behind. That's our major goal of our new strategic framework. So this fits perfect, as I mentioned before, through the accelerator of data and the work we're doing in digital transformation, but at the country level so that we can achieve the transformation pathway plans that the countries are working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximo. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to hear from you all of the different initiatives that are underway and the way in which they connect the different processes. A lot of work to be done, but it's very exciting. I know we have to let you go. If there are any specific questions for Maximo that he's not able to answer here, you can put them in the chat and we can send them his way. It's great to get that broader context. Now to get a country, another country perspective to supplement what we heard from the Undersecretary for the Philippines, we have Elsa Simoes, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Mission of Cabo Verde to the Rome-based agencies. And Elsa, if we can ask you for the first question, why is digital transformation and data important for smallholder farmers in Cabo Verde, and how is the government supporting them?
Thank you, Jenna. Distinguished participants, good afternoon all. At outset, please allow me to congratulate the organizers of this relevant event. And Jenna, to approach your question, which is extremely important, let me contextualize Cabo Verde. Agriculture in Cabo Verde is 98% family and smallholder farmers. And being a small island developing state, we are exposed to various risks and threats, including frequent droughts and flood cycles, pests and diseases, namely locusts, fall armyworm, and millipedes. Adding to all these naturally occurring events, the smallholder farmers also face market price volatility and seasonality, insufficient transport and energy infrastructures. Adapting to all this situation is crucial to the smallholder farmers and fisher folks in Cabo Verde. And this adaptation can only be done through a rational decision-making process for which data and information are paramount. Having weather provisions and knowing rainfall distribution patterns and amount is essential for planning the appropriate sowing period. Information about the new pests and diseases and ways to prevent and treat, price information to better plan the production and enhance their business opportunities are essential to contribute to better incomes and more efficient resource mobilization. The rate of penetration of mobile phones and internet in Cabo Verde is quite high, 80%. Also in rural areas. The use of these new digital technologies for dissemination of agriculture information is a challenge for the government. Currently, only radio and television programs are used for educational and awareness raising of farmers. Clearly, there is plenty of room for expansion and improvement.
Thank you so much, Elsa. Really useful to hear that perspective and to see how and why data and digital transformation is so important in your country. So for our next question, what in your view is needed to strengthen the capacity of countries like yours to collect, analyze, and use quality data for food systems transformation? And how can development partners support them?
Thank you, Jenna. Each country has its own reality with its strengths and weaknesses, thus requiring different sets of support. However, at the end of the day, strengthening countries' capacity lacks three essential assets: time, persistence, and resources, to support them into building a fit-to-size solution. In our case, strengthening the institutional capacity of public, private, and academia through training and technical assistance in the appropriation and use of new technologies and tools for data collection, data analysis, and dissemination, inspired, of course, by existing good practices, would greatly enhance the delivery of technological solutions to our smallholder farmers. Also supporting countries in their process of lowering the cost of internet and improving its quality, while building national capacity for data governance systems, would further democratize this important instrument while we work towards making it a public good. Finally, sensitizing political and decision-making instances on the importance of a steady funding for data collection, analysis, and use of data in transforming food systems may go a long way in increasing efficiency and efficacy in the use of limited human and financial resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsa. It's a pleasure to hear that perspective and to hear what your country is prioritizing. So now we'll move over to hear from Beatrice Kakuba, Executive Director of the African Women Agribusiness Network, to get a view from non-state actors and a broad network in Africa. Beatrice, I wonder if you can tell us what are the barriers and constraints for smallholder farmers to leverage digital tools and technology in Africa?
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you very much for the organizers to allow our One Africa to come in and bring the field perspective and the focus, our focus on women and youth in agribusiness. Yes, I will. Because of the time, I'll try to summarize and give a summary of the key barriers to the for the small holder farmers to leverage on digital tools. First of all, I would like to say that just to remind everyone that when we discuss about this thing, we have to remember that according to FAO, I think that's their data, and they provide a lot of data for us, that the average farmer on the continent is 60 years old. Right. So, and the majority in that group they're women. And we know that gender is inequality of access to everything is very prominent. We have, I think Top spoke about it for the last 25 years. And of course, we have made a lot of progress, but there's still to come. So with that in mind, I want to say that in One Africa, we focus on women and youth, and we have 4 pillars. And one of our 4 pillars is the agri-tech, access to technology. And some of the barriers that we really, one of the key, I think Madam Simaris just spoke about it, is that technology in Africa is expensive. It is expensive because it's not available, and where it's available is not accessible, and where it's accessible is not affordable. We have a table of all the cost of all tech operators. If we take just even telephone operators, because most of our small herders have phones, but they don't have Android. But those who even have Android, because of lack of digital literacy, cannot even access all the information that today is available for everyone. COVID, we did a very, at the middle of the pandemic last year, we did a rapid assessment on our membership of 3,300 members in 44 African countries on how did they adjust to the COVID. And among our members, only 4% adapted to digital marketing and trading. And amongst those 4.4%, 90% were One Africa under 30. And the One Africa under 30, we have 40% of our membership is under 30. And this is just to show that the new face of agriculture on the continent is youth. But those youth also, they are under-resourced, they lack knowledge in agripreneurship, and even with that knowledge, the availability, accessibility, and affordability makes very, very, very difficult to think even about how do we push our, how do we even train, even with training digital literacy, can we afford it? So it's something that we really need to, focus on it, because it's difficult to imagine how we're going to implement, us as implementers, enablers, and accelerators, all the resolution and the good resolution we made in the food summit that just took place, with 80% of the population excluded because of lack of access and affordability.
Thank you, Beatrice. It's such an important question you're asking, and we did get a question in the chat about expanding access at scale. And I think it's a really important point to think not just about the infrastructure and the access to it, but then also literacy and affordability, which you make really important points there. So for your second question, what needs to be done to support smallholder farmers in Africa, and what should governments and other stakeholders be doing from your perspective?
I think I want to add on what the previous speakers, elaborated and spoke very consistently and with good examples of what should be done. There's no one solution, that fits all. But I think when we come to that SMEs, if we're going to rely on SMEs now to continue producing the food that we'll need, with so much concern about food insecurity and the rise in malnutrition, it's going to be difficult if we do not change our mindset, the governments and the donors. I think to be able to implement what we committed and we talked about in all those track actions we've been involved in preparing to the food summit, I think the mindset is not from the small-scale farmers, they're the receiver end. I think the mindset is from the side of the government, the stakeholders, and ourselves, the accelerators and enablers, to re-engineer our thinking and to be intentional and deliberate on how are we going to invest our funds in the next decades if we want to obtain, to change and transform. We're talking about access to technology, to mechanization, to use of data for implementing. We don't just collect data to feed policy, but we use also data to enable and to empower the small-scale farmer. We get a lot of questions for our young farmers who say, okay, you collect data for us and you say it's for your partners and your government and your donors, but what's the feedback? Can we really, go an extra mile and say, this is the data we are processing and this is the package of the data we need, but this data has to go, the feedback has to flow back to the small-scale farmer. What is the profile of the new small-scale farmer? Yeah, who is going to be, the next generation? What do they need? We really have to up our act. We have to accelerate in our way how we're going to really produce a new set of to decide and strategy on the new set of data that will fit the new profile of the next generation of the future. What do we need? How do we manage that? How do we feed back so that they can also feed back into feeding into policy and strategy? I think the mindset, the change of mindset, for this time for change, it has to come for the government, the donors, and the stakeholders to re-engineer and come up with a new way, because data is going to be crucial. I think COVID had shown us that we cannot go back, and it created another gap on accessibility and the understanding on how we're going to be challenged if we don't really, accelerate the way and change our mindset. I think I will stop there. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you, Beatrice. Those are some really great points. And I wonder, we're going to move on to bring Josh Woodard into the discussion now, but I might come back to you and almost put your question back to you from your perspective. What does that new generation of small-scale farmers need? So I'd be interested in your views on that as well. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. So let's go over to Josh Woodard now, Senior Digital Advisor at the USAID Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. I actually think Beatrice teed you up very well on those comments about changing mindsets. So your first question is, how can the donor community support the uptake of digital tools and technology that are more inclusive and representative of smallholder farmers' needs? So I'm wondering if you can maybe speak to how you're thinking about that change of mindset. Over to you, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. So it's a really good question. And I think, thankfully, there's increasingly we're seeing this being thought and talked about more in the donor community. So that's a good start. But, I think we still have a long way to go. I think, one of the first things is donors and our implementing partners have a responsibility to understand the local communities in which they work, and to support the use of digital tools that actually meet and are aligned to local needs, rather than building systems that may not be necessary, or that are completely misaligned with the local context. I know anyone who's worked in this space for some time has probably seen that happen many times in the past, unfortunately. I think we can also play a role in helping to further advance more inclusive and representative digital tools and technologies in agriculture, by really stressing the importance of inclusion and farmer centricity in our policies and programs. So for example, USAID's guidance on inclusive development includes two core principles, which are do no harm, which basically means, we should take measures to ensure that our efforts do not put any individual or marginalized group at risk of harm, and do nothing about them without them. So we should consult with the individuals that we are planning to serve or to support, to understand their needs and priorities. So that's not specific to digital, but I think we should and can apply it to digital. And if we do apply principles like these into how we design our programs and build it into our expectations from partners, I think that's a really good first step. But of course, and this goes to Beatrice's points, inclusive and farmer-centric design, that's only as good as, that's only as useful as people have access. So as long as there are still persistent digital divides in much of the world, and particularly many emerging countries or emerging economies, it doesn't really, that's still an issue. So, we know that more than 1 in 3 people in rural areas in least developed countries either lack access to mobile networks entirely, or only have access to 2G coverage. These barriers are often greater for women, which can limit their access to things like finance, to employment opportunities, economic engagement. Women are about 20% less likely on average to own a smartphone, and 43% less likely to engage online, which has real consequences for their families and for food production. It's important to note, though, that these gaps are not unique to women. They also impact people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, ethnic, linguistic, and religious minorities, amongst others. So it's important to ensure that we think differently about how we're developing and deploying digital solutions, so that we're not going to be exacerbating existing inequalities. And also that we make sure that we're not excluding those who make a choice not to make use of digital technologies as we increasingly move into a digital economy. For our part, USAID is committed to closing the digital divide and integrating inclusive development goals into all of our programs. Ultimately, though, overcoming what CGIAR has defined as the 3 levels of digital divide in terms of variations in access to technology, use of technology, and benefit from technology requires proactive steps from all stakeholders in the ecosystem, so not just the donor community. That extends to government agencies, to technology companies, agribusinesses, investors, the education system, civil society, everyone else. Although from the donor community perspective, I think that we can help to make the case through our investments for how digital solutions that are inclusive and farmer-centric are not just a good thing to do from an equity perspective, but they can also lead to economic growth and increased profit for service providers. And finally, just want to make a quick plug. The ICT for Ag conference that USAID has supported for the past few years. The next one is coming up in March 2022. This one is going to have a very strong focus on locally led and inclusive development. So I'd encourage anyone who is interested in these issues or has something to share related to these issues, please check it out at ictforag.com. It's ICTFORAG.com. ag.com. The new details are not yet up on the website, so it still talks about last year's conference, but it's coming very soon, so you can still sign up and put your information in there now.
Great, thank you, Josh. So I'm wondering if you can now reflect a little bit on challenges that you face. So you highlighted some steps that donors can be taking and that USAID can be taking, but I'm wondering if you can reflect on some of the main challenges that the donor community is facing and to get to this shift in mindset, and particularly to promote responsible data and digital transformation. We have a lot of questions coming in the chat that really speak to governance and ethics, which we can explore more in the Q&A, but please, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think, one of the main challenges is just the reality that many of the most successful businesses in the digital space are built on a business model that exchanges data for services. So basically individuals trade their data with a technology provider to make use of services. And oftentimes that's for free. They get access to it for free by trading their data. But I think as long as data is the commodity that companies are commercializing, it certainly presents some challenges to promoting responsible data and digital transformation that puts the rights and privacy of users front and center. So that's why I believe that it's important for those of us in the donor community to support efforts that encourage greater emphasis on considering privacy, safety, and security of individuals and businesses in relation to their data and the digital technologies they use. So that includes us thinking about things like data governance and ownership models, and how those, to Beatrice's point also, I know this is more from the perspective of development organizations that are collecting the data, but it extends also, I think, to technology providers, is really thinking about the farmer's place in the governance and ownership of that data. So I think, from our perspective, one of the USAID's digital strategy, one of the two objectives within that is to improve measurable development and humanitarian assistance outcomes through responsible use of digital technology in our programming. And that includes a focus on both USAID and our staff and also our partners. So ultimately, we want to deliver better outcomes in a responsible way, one that is both contextually appropriate and optimizes the opportunities of digital technology while also effectively managing the risk. And as part of that, we want our staff and our partner staff to be able to assess opportunities and risks with digital technology and data, and within our partner nation's digital ecosystem, so to really understand that within the context they're working. And then to develop programs based on that understanding that maximize the benefits while also mitigating the risks. For our part, USAID was also an early advocate of the principles for digital development, and a number of those principles emphasize the importance of taking a responsible approach to the design and deployment of digital technology. But with your first question as well, it's not something that the donor community alone can address. So while we encourage our staff and our partners to pay more consideration to these issues, it requires a collective effort from all the relevant stakeholders. So as I mentioned earlier, that includes policymakers, tech companies, investors, ag actors, civil society. All these groups need to be involved to find viable alternative models to data governance, to the sort of design of digital technologies that are win-win for both service providers and their users. And I think the last thing I'll say in terms of challenges is that the reality in most donor-funded work in the development sector is that they tend to be very time-bound. So we have, a 3-year or 5-year program, right? And so that means that it's often just faster and more practical for development programs to just go with the status quo rather than take the time to employ a more user-centric approach to our use of data and digital. So I think, thankfully, I've seen an increased realization of the importance of these issues, and not only from the donor side, but also increasingly from digital tech providers and ecosystem enablers. So I do think that while there's room for us, there certainly is a lot of room for us to grow in this space. I'm optimistic that we're headed in the right direction. And I think particularly if all the stakeholders that I mentioned, if we can continue to work together to promote responsible approaches to data and digital in a way that encourages rather than stifles innovation, we're on the right path.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. We'll move on now to bring Vivian Faria into the conversation. Thank you for being so patient, Vivian. But Josh, I want you to, you've given a lot of good ideas about promoting that responsible engagement of users of effective communities. And I'm going to come back to you and ask you for at least one concrete example, perhaps, from work that you've been doing. So give that some thought. Vivian, over to you now, you're from Trimble Ag Business Solutions, bringing a private sector perspective to the discussion. As you can see from the chat and the discussion, we have had a lot of questions about data ownership and governance and ethics. So you're welcome to reflect on that. But first, for your first question, what in your view is the role of the private sector in digital transformation and data space? Oh, Vivian, I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for us to bring inputs from the industry here on this panel. Well, private sector play many roles, right? It goes from production to geospatial planning, to access market, financial planning. But one of the biggest roles we play is bringing technologies to the market that can capture this data we're talking here and a high quality and improve real-time decision-making. So we have sensors, for instance, that can be installed in the fields and collect soil moisture, soil information, monitors that goes in the tractor that can, capture the as applied map, chemical fertilizers or productivity. And even, this is smartphones that some farmers can just enter a manual recording. But we also have software platforms, which is the data management, that digest all this information and have BI tools, business intelligence, that can convert those information to more efficient and sustainable farming operation. Now, as we democratize the use of this data, that becomes not just valuable for the farmer, but also for the regional. And it can feed into early warning systems around crop productivity potential, impact of climate change in agriculture, crop disease models, and so many others, like environment control due to nitrogen application. So I personally worked many years in Brazil for the government in coffee and sugarcane crop yield projection to support government policies in agriculture. So anyways, the data, I think, is one of the biggest role. And then we also support cross-collaborative initiatives around the globe in less developed countries. And an example we have is also a project going on in Uganda, in Africa, Beatrice, and is a partnership with USAID, World Bank, and Agilis. And Agilis is a company that is helping the smallholding farmers with the infrastructure they need, all the hardware, equipment, and training to actually adopt sustainable practices, but also increase their production. So with that, they can feed more people in Uganda, but also in Africa. And it goes very well with Beatrice's comments that technology is expensive and not accessible. So we do need to facilitate that infrastructure. And another role we play is on the monetization side. So for instance, carbon markets and sustainability reporting, we help farmers to monetize their data, and while they still adopting new technologies and climate smart practices to improve profitability. Now, the way I see is like the roles we play in private industry goes beyond the commerce, right? So we have very much been involved on social, economical, and environmental initiatives around the world to increase adoption of sustainable practices, increase productivity, and feed more people.
Great, thank you, Vivian. That's some really interesting examples there. So moving on to your second question, how can data held by private companies contribute to evidence-informed policymaking and better agriculture and food security outcomes? What, in your view, are the opportunities and risks of using that data held by private companies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because we don't own the farm data, right? It goes back to Josh's comment and the ownership. That's owned by the farmer. So we have access to it, and we have some policy agreements in place for the licensing to access the data, but the ownership is still on the farmer level. Now, although I said that, I do believe farmers would be open in sharing the data to support the Global Food Security Initiative, as long as they have something in return, right? Whatever we build has to add value to the farmer, either to make the operation more efficient or increase their productivity. And one thing I've learned as I speak with farms across the globe on my daily basis is that connectivity is the biggest limiting factor when we talk about data sharing. So if that's not available, it makes it very difficult, and it becomes our opportunity here. So I believe if there was more investment from the governments in improving the internet connectivity in rural areas, that would benefit everyone. And I can see an example that Trimble is working in Brazil in conjunction with all the industry players, and we are bringing 4G connectivity to the agriculture areas. And just for context, 70% of agricultural land in Brazil have no internet connectivity. So you can imagine the impact and benefit for data access, not just for the farmers, but for all the other people interested in that. Now, when you talk about some countries, we know that they have resources to invest in sensors and technology, but that's not the reality for smallholding farms, right? So when we go in that niche, we really need to make sure that we bring technologies in a regional scale and we can support them collectively so that they can adopt sustainable practices, they can increase their profitability. Then another thing I want to mention here about the evidence policy making, one important thing to consider is also have some sort of flexibility when we are creating those policies to be adopted in certain regions. As I speak earlier, there is some limitation sometimes in data access or infrastructure, and if you don't address that, it's going to be very hard for those smallholding farms, adopt the smart practices and ensure they are executed successfully.
Excellent. Thank you, Vivienne. So now we're going to move into the Q&A. We do have a number of great speakers on the panel, and so I'm going to do my best to kind of batch these questions that we've gotten in the chat and to direct them to individual speakers. Maximo, I'll come over to you first. And when you shared the elements that came out of the Food Systems Summit and the work that you're doing with partners to put those into practice, you referenced ethical and responsible approaches. You referenced agile governance and learning, et cetera, with respect to those questions of ownership. And I'm wondering if you can share one or two examples or ideas of what you're planning to do from within the FAO to address some of these questions around ownership and control and how data feeds back to farmers, how they can use it. And you also highlighted agency and consent. So would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Jenna. And this is a very, very important issue because the last thing that you want is by giving more access to digital technologies and to data, you create more inequalities, no? And you create more increase the differences between groups. And that's where we need to be extremely careful. So there are three ways in which we are looking at this in FAO. So the first way, as part of our strategic framework, we have 4 accelerators. Data is one of those, and real-time data. Then there is innovation, technology, but then there is something that we call complements. And that accelerator of complements is the one that it has to do this job, which is institutions, regulations, governance, and human capital. So why? Because human capital is for capabilities, no? So that we can build up the capabilities so that people cannot self-exclude themselves from the technologies and from the access to this type of information because they are illiterate, which is typically in the poorest countries in the rural areas. And that's where we need to find ways to create mechanisms to minimize that risk. So that's one element. But the other element is on governance and institutions. So how we can create mechanisms so that you can have rules of the game clear, so that big corporations or big companies or big data generator agencies don't control the information, which in many cases is private, and without having all the protocols in place to avoid identifying even a farmer or the characteristics of the farmer or profiting from data of farmers. And that is not an easy job. It's a very complex job. The regulatory agency of the European Union has progressed on that, also in the US. But we need to learn from other realities, and that's what part of the role of this International Platform for Digital Food and Agriculture is trying to bring north-south, south-south learning so that we can leapfrog on the best practices. Now, developing regulatory agencies and institutions like this requires I think in the case of poor countries, it's very difficult because they can always be captured. And the experience has shown us that that's a major risk. So we need to find ways to find a solution that could be at the subregional or at the regional level within the continent, like in the case of Europe. And the third element is making data public with all the clearances and all the mechanisms in place to minimize those potential risks. And that for us is a validation, but at the same time, giving access to everybody at the same level of this type of information, which will reduce this type of inequalities. But we need to be very careful on the identity, especially in geospatial data. And FAO is developing a global policies, overall policy of data use and property rights for data and statistics in FAO, which we hope could be as a model also, because the UN doesn't have one. And many IFIs don't have one. Even they don't have the typical protocols that we have to put in place. So we are doing a huge effort to try to develop this so that we can at least share that and try to see how this can expand to other entities. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to hear about the work in progress so that everyone listening can look forward to those things as they develop. I want to go back over to Elsa Simoes now, because we had a question directly for you in the chat from Robin Anderson, who helps coordinate the private sector mechanism of the CFS. The question to you, Elsa, was how do you get in your country, in Cabo Verde, how do you get digital technology into the hands of smallholder farmers? Because I think, we've heard a lot about sort of access and leveling the playing field. Can you give us some maybe concrete examples of how your country is thinking about getting that technology into the hands of smallholder farmers?
Okay, thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Robin, for making the question. First of all, it's important to understand that our average farmer in Cabo Verde is between 40 and 50 years old, and even older. So I think this is a reality that many countries face. Even though we have a young population, they are going out of the rural areas and from agriculture. So the first thing we really are doing is to invest in training young people in agriculture at professional and university level, so that they are able to have the abilities and the capacity to work in the field, either as farmers or researchers, or in private sector, any private company supplying any agriculture inputs. Another approach that we are also doing is promoting incubators in this area and innovation labs. This is also a way to bring to the young people, this idea of that they can change things. And during this pandemic, we registered really very interesting initiatives from the young in this area, where they really took the new technology and then they start creating their small business and selling agriculture goods and delivering the goods directly to the client, to the consumer. And we are also looking into fundings, because we have also a program that promotes and funds at certain level some agriculture projects that in this area that are viable, so they can submit their proposal to be funded. So these are the initiatives we have. And it's always interesting to know also that there are ideas. Sometimes the thing that we miss is the funding to really step up all the initiatives that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Really great to hear that. It's so interesting to hear those specifics that are happening at country level. I want to go back over to Beatrice now. So I would love for you to sort of answer your own question. So what do you think the smallholder farmer of the future really needs, so that everyone else on the panel and listening can hear that from your perspective? And then I'd also like to hear you reflect on some of what you've heard from the other panelists about steps taken to address sort of consent and agency and with respect to data collection and access and use. So some of the governance questions and how they affect maybe some of your network members. So over to you, Beatrice.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Okay, to your first point, I think some organizations really, I'm actually very happy to hear what all the panelists have said and all the progress that they made. At least we are all in sync, and we are all trying to do things to promote that to the small scale farmers. I want to give an example. We have, for example, a project with a few East Africa region where we have to coach and mentor 60 agri-businesses in the region in 3 countries. And what was interesting for us to see that, there is a really an open also mindset that's coming up, is that when we were doing our budget with them, we said, if we're going to do it virtually, we also have to include the price of, the cost of connectivity and the cost of to the trainees to access internet, because it's very expensive. They cannot take out of their budget to go on a course. And this is why, of course, this is because of COVID. And that's why when we really look at the budget between the cost of digital and what you lose as information in the small scale farmers and the technology, is very expensive. So I really want to commend FAO, not just because Maximo is here, but it was really open and everyone was like, yeah, we have seen that. So, and to this point is because let's remember that our rural area in Africa is still very traditional. And our first mode of expression is oral tradition. And when you start, when you start collecting data, I will bring in the quality of data, you really have to understand that it is the way you ask the question, they will, because there's a lot of translation going on between the French for the French speaking to the local language, or English to some English speaking. When they don't understand, there is a lot of information that is lost between, because the way you answer is depending on the question. If they're not sure about where you're going to take that data, if it's going to collect tax, if it's going to report them for doing something that they should not be doing, it's a lot. We really have also to think about the quality of the data, because our intervention will depend on how we interpret it. Yeah. So our rural area is still rural and not really modernized in terms of in tune with what we expect from other regions, or what we want to get out of that. So, but when we talk about the youth, I think that's where now the interest is. Our young agripreneur, they have one tool, and it gives us an opportunity to really jumpstart or kick or upgrade the agriculture, where we think the transformation will take place because of that Android phone they have. But that Android we have to bring into context that Joshua was saying, and what type of app we are going to, what is our definition of the future, young agripreneur. Madame Simon talked about the average age of also in Cabo Verde, but it's also on the rest of the continent. When on our network, our members from 45 to 50, the median entrepreneur, which is the missing link that we don't address, by the way. Because we think that when you are a medium entrepreneur, you have enough. It's not true. They have money, but they don't have access to technology. They don't have access to financial literacy. They don't have access to all those things that will make an entrepreneur thrive in the ecosystem that we have today. And the data actually will confirm that. And I like very much what I heard from Maximo, from Josh. I think we are all in the same direction. But we have to go and think, how do we change, and how do we focus on this young entrepreneur? And I think this project with FAO is going to give us a lot of, FAO East Africa is going to give us a lot of information on that. By the way, Maximo will be using the AYA platform that you just developed, and I think this is going to be a good thing to see. If it works, then we can take to the rest of the continent. I think it will be very, very good thing. And the second point to you, Jenna, please, if you can. There was another point that you wanted.
Yeah, maybe just reflect for 1 minute on some of the questions that have come up around data ownership and governance, and how is that viewed from the perspective of your network?
Okay, so okay, I think as everyone said, we also have a policy. When you go to our website, of course, we give the privacy information. But we have to remember that there's a lot of donors that are acting in the space of agriculture, and we come with different questions. So sometimes our members are also being, part of a data collection from GIZ, from USAID, from FAO, from everyone. And if you look at the answers, they are different for the same question and the same information. So we have to be very careful on the quality of information here, very much so, because they have understood that, oh, they're asking us, so maybe we get money next time, because the feedback is not there. We really have to go that way. And I like what I heard, and I really was playing music to my ears, because everybody's aware of that. The second most challenging thing, I think, Madame Simon will agree with me, we do have a policy of data protection at the African Union, I think, and each country is trying to work that, but we don't have any tools to really go and check the use of the data that comes out of our countries to any private sector, to the telephone communicate to our kids who are now hooked to Facebook, to Instagram, to WhatsApp. We don't know where is data going, and our governments have no fund or no budget or no whatever to be able to control data. And that's something very worrying, because as we all know, for those who have children, we know that a lot of things go to that internet. We don't even know how it's get there. We don't even work, we even control what our children are watching. So when it comes back to these small scale farmers, a lot of it going out, we don't know what's going with that information, but what is it coming back, and all, So I think this is something that we all have to reflect on that. What is, we don't have, our governments have not yet control on that data. It's controlled by some multinationals. We don't know what's going on, for which use and for what. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Certainly a growing concern. So we are running a little bit short on time, but I'd like to make sure we bring Josh and Vivian back into the discussion. So Josh, coming back to you, maybe, as I said earlier, you could give us like one concrete example of how you're thinking about that shift in mindset. And I do want to also flag that there was a question in the chat around how donors can improve food security data systems in humanitarian situations. You're probably best placed to answer that question. So maybe give us a minute or two reflections on that. Over to you, Josh.
Sure. So in terms of just a concrete example, I'll just give one. I knew in Ghana, USAID worked with Fidelity Bank to look at some of the constraints that smallholder farmers were facing in access to financial services. And then they designed a product. So Fidelity Bank designed a product that had lower customer requirements, so that it was more geared to the actual needs of farmers. And so they were able to, I think, onboard several 100,000 farmers, the majority of them women, to access these financial services. They since partnered with MTN, a mobile operator, to scale that service and offer it nationwide. So that's just one example of how, when you actually talk and listen to the people who you're trying to serve and hear their needs, hear their challenges, the barriers they face, how that can impact the design of an intervention of a product or a service to be more aligned to them. On the question related to, can you tell me the data one? What was the exact framing of the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, the question was, how can donors improve food security data systems in humanitarian situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't, off the top of my head, have an answer to that. I think that it's something that there's certainly, we need to be working a lot more, or there needs to be continued collaboration between donors, because a lot of donors are working in this space in some capacity. And there is collaboration between donors there, but I think, there certainly is room for us to continue to amplify that collaboration, to make sure that we reduce some of the, to Beatrice's point, issues with having multiple donor projects collecting similar types of data from the same individuals. I think that requires, but it's complicated because it requires, there's just a lot of parties involved. It's not something that can just be done at one level. It has multiple levels that have to be sorted through.
Thank you, Josh. So over to you, Vivian, now. Maybe if you could offer one or two reflections from your perspective in a private sector company. You described the way in which the private sector can bring technology to market to enable a capture of that data. Where do you think is, but we've heard also a lot about collaboration. So what's the low-hanging fruit? What's the greatest opportunity for collaboration between private and public sector on these questions of digital transformation and data, that you think more can be done and quickly?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, I think when you talk about the small holding farms, it's certainly, use the local players, because they are the ones that are working with those small holding farms collectively and can facilitate the data gathering, the managing of the information, and also the data sharing. So the Uganda project, for instance, that Agilis company is critical for us to make the bridge and access the small holding farms data in a such way that has value for all of us. But there's other cross collaboration happening, like I said, the connectivity piece, right? So I go back to that because this is what I hear a lot from the farmers I speak with. No matter where they are located, if you don't address that connectivity issue, how can we anticipate data sharing, right? So actually to capture proper data, and I go back to Jenna, right? The quality of data is very critical. I have worked many years with modeling, and I know, sorry for the term, but garbage in, garbage out. So you can't actually produce anything as good if you don't have quality of data. But as you capture, you need to facilitate the sharing, so to the cloud systems. So I think those would be my examples of cross collaboration.
Great, thank you, Vivian. So now we're coming to the end. We have about 15 minutes left. What we're going to do is we're going to go back to each of the panelists, and I'm going to ask you to spend no more than 1 minute giving us your final thoughts. I'd like each of you in that final thought to maybe share what you think is the single thing that can be done from your perspective to facilitate the kind of collaboration, improved governance, and access to digital technology and data that you can think of. So what's that single top priority in your mind? While you think about that, I wanted to share also that the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data recently published over the summer 2 reports. One is called Data for Food Security, and that really explores some of these questions of improved collaboration across all stakeholders that has been coming up in the questions and the discussion today. and how to get at improving the financing and the collaboration around these issues. And the second is called From Local Needs to Local Knowledge, which digs into the experience of governments and other stakeholders in Africa and Latin America on those needs that we've been talking about. So if you'd like to explore those. I also want to highlight that many of our participants have shared reports and examples of their work in the chat, which is fantastic, and even asked for connections. So please do look at the chat for those email addresses and links to reports. It's fantastic to always be sharing that information. So now we'll go back to the panelists for your 1-minute reflection, and we'll go in speaking order so that you can be prepared and not caught off guard. We'll go to you first, Maximo, for your final thought, please.
So it's very difficult to have one recommendation, but I think for us, the most important thing is to have the best quality data available to make policy decisions and as close as possible to real time. And that requires support also from donors and requires donors to understand the value that data has inside situations like the one we have lived in COVID-19. I think that's central. And sometimes I think there is not such an understanding because of our fault could be, we don't know how to explain it well, but there is a huge benefit of having this as close as possible real-time data available to make decisions. And that applies to emergencies where we don't have still tools to have predictive power, to situations like COVID-19 that was in many cases not an emergency, but which led to misallocation of support to areas that were not necessarily the ones needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximo, and very excellent points. Over to you, Elsa, for your final thought.
Yes, it's like Mr. Massimo Torero said, it's really difficult to pinpoint one only priority, but besides the need to democratize the new technologies and make them accessible to people, I would say that it's important that international community and partners be able to support a mechanism that can provide on request technical assistance and a steady funding, while countries are advised into the centrality of data and into organizing and prioritizing data collection and analysis as a routine management process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elsa. And moving swiftly over to you, Beatrice, for your final thought.
Yes, I just want to echo my previous panelists. Yes, it's difficult to pinpoint, but I really, of course, really want intentionally to reiterate that we really focus on small-scale farmers and on digital, literacy, and also for all the things that we said to really try and reduce the gap. Yeah, the digital gap that have been there, but was very much highlighted during the COVID-19 because those who had access to information really could even survive. And we saw it in the small businesses that 90% of them lost their income when we had the lockdowns. Yeah, so only those who were digital literate could adapt to marketing. It's very crucial, and we really have a lot of way to go to be able to really save those small-scale farmers. And the second thing is also, like everyone says, to make sure that really the quality of data and use data every day in what we do. I'm sure that the donor community and our governments are working on how to protect the policy, but in between, COVID had highlighted, as Massimo and Madame said, the lack of reliable data. We need that if we want to improve. And that also had to take, with that excluding the small-scale farmers. It is, if we want to have sustainable food system, we really have to keep on the focus on that and address those issues that we all discussed and really try to accelerate and catch up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Beatrice. Now over to you, Josh, for your final reflection.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to not just accept the status quo when it comes to business models, data governance and ownership models. We need to be thinking a bit more creatively there. And there are people, or there are organizations, companies that are already in doing things in a bit different way. And don't let the expediency of just feeling this urge that you have to use digital mean that you rush into introducing some sort of digital technology that's not really aligned to the needs, both sort of the immediate and the long-term needs and aspirations of the people who we're trying to support. And so I think a lot of that, to my earlier points, I think that requires collaboration. It requires all the stakeholders to really think about things differently. So I just encourage that. And final plug again, ST4Ag conference. We hope to be having some of that discussion and moving things forward there. So hope to see some people there.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for sharing the information about that. So Vivian, over to you for your final reflection.
Yeah, thank you, Jenna. Yeah, I just believe there is so many opportunities that private and public sectors can cross-collaborate in order to bring a digital transformation for small holding farms. But we need to make sure we have the support and infrastructure available, right? So then we can proceed with data collection. But also, it is very important to leave clear that we do need to ensure that the farmers still have the ownership of data, right? And then they have the autonomy to stop sharing if they decide to, or also have transparency on how the data is being used. So they feel comfortable and they see value of what we're doing. And, and basically we can attend our main goal, which is adopt of more smart food security across the globe.
Thanks so much, Vivian. What a rich discussion and fantastic questions in the chat. We're now going to hear from Kevin McDonald, who has been listening attentively and is going to attempt to offer some final remarks and sum up for us. A hard task, but one I'm sure you're up for, Kevin. So over to you.
Thanks, Jenna, and to my colleagues in the panel and to the participants. It's been a very interesting discussion, and we've heard from our speakers about the role and the importance of agriculture, not only from the food supply point of view, but also from the socioeconomic aspect. And additionally, we need to consider the role of agriculture with respect to managing our soil's health. And we know that healthy soils are critical for sustainable crop production, for maintaining the socioeconomic structure associated with local agriculture, and for increasing both the soils and hence the crops' ability to withstand weather variability and to enable soils to store and manage our carbon balances and hence contribute to our global carbon balances. Our panelists have spoken about the opportunities that the democratization of digital agriculture will bring to the food systems and the critical need for collaboration between farmers, companies, and the key stakeholders. So this collaborative effort, it will enable us to get some benefits at the regional level. For example, as we heard on soil data, on crop growth performance, on crop pricing, and even rainfall levels. So they could then be available at a local level so that individual growers could make better decisions because then they'd be better informed. And as we've heard, if we link that to education and to guidance on agronomy, then we will enable growers to decide if there is an economic benefit to their decision to apply a crop input, and that's based on understanding their soil properties, the weather indices, but also understanding the future prices for their crops as well. We have heard that this will require significant hardware infrastructure requirements, but also in addition, the effort will need good governance on data ownership, data sharing, and the privacy issues, and these are challenges which we still need to address. When we start to collect data from local to regional scales, we actually have that potential, as we've heard, to harvest that data for a wider purpose, such as the role of soil in a water catchment area, the ability to conserve water during periods of both flood and drought. And that links, as we've heard, to the opportunity to develop site-specific early warning systems and the strategies associated with those. Combining and gathering that data from such a range of different sources can be challenging, as we've heard. But the learning experiences that we've had from examples such as Metro Alarm, Cornucopia, REMA, they've shown the value in weather and soil data. And examples such as Agilis and the financial services in Ghana that have been referred to have shown the benefits that can come from those collective efforts. If we integrate those efforts into an agricultural protection concept, that enables us to develop not only early warning and disease prevention strategies, where the underlying effort is in an environment that improves both the soil health, but also the crop agronomy, the water catchment, and the carbon balances, then that enables us to have a much more sustainable agricultural economy for the individual growers. And as we've heard discussed at length, the democratization of the digital agricultural data, combined with the collaboration that we've been hearing about from small-scale local farmers and private companies, government organizations, and institutional actors, gives us this incredible opportunity to harness that data in an agri-smart way, in a data-smart way, indeed in a climate-smart way, as the Undersecretary referred to in his opening remarks. And that enables us to develop site-specific best sustainable practices. And this connectivity then enables us to have a potential for new knowledge development that enables us to work beyond the local reach into the regional area as well. So Gina, as we've heard today, there's an incredibly strong passion from our speakers and the organizations that they represent to work collectively for the benefit of farmers and producers. And by using the power in scaling digital agriculture, we can get the benefits across many initiatives such as gender, economy, youth, income equality, market access. These are all points that our speakers have mentioned. And therefore, there's an opportunity with this collective data that brings about possibilities that we didn't have at an individual level. We make decisions every day, and the decisions we make, they're only as good as the data, the information that we have, and that we base these decisions on. If we think about a growing season for an agricultural crop, even taking wheat as an example, there's probably about 140 points that we need to make an intervention and make a decision on. But as individuals, there is a limit to the amount of data that we can use to make these decisions. So building these smart agri-systems on a range of different agricultural data sources gives us the potential to significantly improve our decision-making process. So in conclusion, Jenna, I think from the discussions that we have seen and heard about the advantages and indeed the challenges and the benefits that digital agriculture could bring to farmers and growers. We've also heard about the need for quality data. We've heard about the need to have it in real time for making decisions. We can't enable this digital gap to be developed between people using and understanding data and those that can have the benefits from it. And also that the digital technology must be suitable to the region, the source, and the application we want to use it for. So if we combine those together, we can see the opportunities that harnessing that data can have and can bring to all the stakeholders in this global food systems. And we now have a chance, I think, to act on this and to bring about change and to bring about opportunity to both these stakeholders and to their families. So they're the main thoughts that I'm taking away from it, Jenna.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for an excellent summary. I'm now launching a quick poll. It's very short because we would be remiss if we were not data-driven in thinking about the quality of events like this one. And we really welcome your input on these simple questions. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much to the panelists, including the Undersecretary who couldn't stay with us the whole time, to Maximo for sticking with us as well, and all the panelists. It was such a rich discussion and such a great set of questions in the chat. So we are at time. Please do fill out the poll, and thank you very much, and best wishes for the ending of the CFS plenary this week. Thank you, everyone.